Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. Welcome, and thanks so much for joining us for another installment of The Story of Film and Odyssey. Tonight we're going to bring you Chapter 7 of this 15-episode series. This particular chapter about how the European New Wave movement of the 50s and into the 60s influenced film everywhere so much. And joining me again is Mark Cousins, the writer, director, and narrator of the series. Welcome back, Mark.
Thank you, Robert.
Now tell us about what the New Wave was all about. Why did it influence everybody so much?
Well, the New Wave was like a response to the changing times. As we said last week, the 1950s were bursting at the seams.
And
social change, confused. And the New Wave said, okay, let's just explode cinema. Let's plant a bomb under the movies and see where the fragments fall.
And the New Wave people were?
Jean-Luc Godard, Agnès Varda, a great director, François Truffaut.
But these are a lot of French former critics,
yes,
who really knew film,
yes,
but wanted film to go in a different direction.
Yes, they wanted it to be more jaggy, more fragmented, more like modern life.
And they kind of said, well, they're not doing it, let's do it. Let's make a film.
Let's do it.
Each make a film and show them.
And they said, let's make personal cinema.
Right.
They loved Hollywood. They absolutely loved John Ford. They loved Howard Hawks. But they wanted to make something a bit like more personal, as if a camera was like a pen and you could write your autobiography. So when you look at the films that they made, they're about real people without makeup on the streets of Paris, sitting in cafes, talking about ideas, falling in love, flirting, the stuff that people do in Paris, you know, and they wanted to capture that. I don't think even they knew how influential they would be. This new wave that started in Paris literally swept around the world.
Right.
Nowhere in the world was uninfluenced by their discoveries, their sense of their new modernity, you could say.
Now, you talked to many of these people, like Bertolucci.
Yes.
You interviewed, that's in this segment. Were they surprised about what they had done? Their
jaw dropped open. Bertolucci talks about being in Italy when the great filmmaker Pasolini was doing his first films. And it goes like this. We did not know that cinema could be so much about our lives. Cinema was something done to you. It was a fantasy world. It was a kind of utopia in some sense. It came from elsewhere. Suddenly, you could move the camera whichever way you wanted. You could put your own politics, your own sexuality, anything on screen. And they were shocked. They didn't know. It was almost like they thought they would have to force the door down, and it just fell open.
Right. I had the great pleasure of interviewing Jean-Paul Belmondo at our film festival in Los Angeles, and he said that one reason he was so free in the film and had such a good time making it was they didn't think it was ever going to be released. He said, we knew we were making garbage. This wasn't going to be, nobody was going to see this movie, so we felt very free to do all this stuff. And he said they couldn't believe it when this turned out to be an international success that made them all famous.
And when you're an actor like Belmondo and you're in a film where they don't ask you to do take after take after take, and they don't go wide, medium, close, over the shoulder, you don't do any of that. It feels unprofessional but fresh.
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
When you come to the edit suite, you don't have perfect coverage, so you jump cut.
Right.
It's a shock, and you're taught in film schools you do not jump cut.
Yeah.
And yet it looked great.
Breaking the rules.
Breaking the rules.
Yeah. Well, let's have a look. Here being shown for the first time, not just on TCM, but on U.S. television, Chapter 7 of The Story of Film and Odyssey, subtitled The Shock of the New Modern Filmmaking in Western Europe. Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. Up next for us on TCM, we have Chapter 8 in the documentary series, The Story of Film and Odyssey. Well, last week we took a look at the European New Wave movement from the 1950s into the 60s. Right now we're going to have a look at the impact that movement had on various filmmakers around the world, including Roman Polanski, Andrei Tarkovsky, and Dennis Hopper. And back to introduce this next chapter is the writer, director, narrator of this 15-part series, Mark Cousins. Welcome again, Mark.
Thank you, Robert.
Now, this was such an interesting era, and so many things changing. I have to ask you, when you're putting a documentary together, and you've got 15 hours, basically, to cut it down, how, though, do you only get into that 1 hour all that happens in, say, a decade?
It's It's very difficult. You know, what we're about to watch lasts an hour, but the first cut of it was 182 minutes, so it was 3 hours. So we had to lose 2 hours.
You had to lose 2 hours.
Yeah, and so we had to crunch it down, and it makes it quite hectic. But then the 60s were quite hectic. There were so many things going on, and I saw this bit of the story as a kind of road movie. So we start in Eastern Europe, and then we go to Calcutta, and Calcutta was buzzing with cinematic activity. So it's like getting on an express train and going really fast around the world this coming bit.
What country was the first country to really be influenced by the French New Wave movement?
Well, when you think of the Eastern Bloc still under communism, they were desperate to find new ways of making films that were about protest, that sort of smuggled messages into their films. So the Czechoslovakia, Russia, Soviet Union, they watched the French films and loved them because they thought, this is modern, this is a way of us making rebellious films within our societies. You get to the Soviet Union, a filmmaker like Tarkovsky, who's deeply serious and religious, and you're not really allowed to be religious in the Soviet Union, but he thinks, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to make passionately religious films within my society. So it was almost like the energy of France fueled Russia, etc. But then when you get to India, India decolonized in 1947, this massive country, chaotic, and the Indian filmmakers in the 50s think we can try and describe our societies with this new film language, and they did so brilliantly.
Is there a particular thing about this era that fascinated you?
I think it was the bravery and courage of the directors. They were, just as when we talked about the 20s, you remember we said that filmmakers were dealing with new ideas.
Right.
They were like virgin territory.
Right.
Once again, these directors in this era were being brave. They were going where nobody had gone before, coming up with new ways of editing, new ways of being serious, etc., particularly in India. And that's what's exciting. A director called Ritvik Ghatak tries to do something very new, and I think he does. And I just salute the bravery of those filmmakers.
I think it's also fascinating that so many of them did it thinking nobody was going to particularly notice. Exactly. They were really doing it what they wanted to do and make a personal statement, what they didn't know that everybody was going to be watching.
And doesn't that make you more disinhibited if you think nobody's watching?
Exactly.
You know, like there's this famous thing, people say, dance as if no one's watching. And if you dance when no one's watching, you dance more joyously.
Right.
And I think those filmmakers did the equivalent.
Right.
They did something because they thought they could get away with it.
Yeah.
And they did.
And nobody was going to pay attention.
Yeah.
And we did.
We did.
So let's have a look. Here we go. The U.S. television premiere of Chapter 8 in the story of film and Odyssey. This chapter is subtitled, New Waves Sweep Around the World. Hi, I'm Robert Osborne. For the past 2 months, we've been bringing you the first 8 chapters in the landmark documentary series, The Story of Film and Odyssey. The story started with the birth of movies, and tonight we're focusing on the late 1960s and 70s, what was going on in American filmmaking during that decade. And joining me, as he has from the very start, is film historian Mark Cousins, the man who created the series, giving us his vision of the story of film. Welcome back, Mark.
Thank you, Robert.
Now, this is a very interesting time. Censorship is no longer an issue in Hollywood. Do you think there were some negative aspects to that as well?
Yes, I think there is. You know, when censorship goes, people who haven't been allowed to portray sex and violence, often what they portray as sex and violence is it's the shock of the new, and sometimes it becomes, yeah, you can do it. So people overemphasize that aspect of the human spectrum and don't look at the other bits. And so sometimes that's a problem.
What other things about this decade fascinate you?
You know, so with the end of the 1960s, the deaths of many people, Malcolm X, Janis Joplin, the dream of the 60s was over. And so you would think that the 1970s might have been a fallow period for American film. And the surprise is that it's one of the best periods. It's the most fertile periods. These new directors like Scorsese and Altman come along, but also satire comes along. Buck Henry, the film of Catch-22, etc., comes along. You've got people looking at American society in all different ways. And then beyond that, really excitingly for me, a filmmaker like Charles Burnett comes along, one of the first great black African-American directors, which is fantastic. And then Woody Allen. There's been lots of Jewishness on the edge of American cinema. Woody Allen plonks Jewishness right at the heart of it. So new lives are appearing on screen, new realities about American cinema. So no wonder that this is considered one of the great periods for American filmmaking.
Mm-hmm. And also, we have to say that so many of that part of the Hollywood transition was so many of the great legends and legendary stars, the Clark Gables, the Bogarts, the Gary Coopers, they were kind of now totally out of the picture.
Yeah.
They had died, passed on, so that era was like pretty much smashed.
It was smashed, yes.
So all these new people coming in had more opportunities to grow. They weren't having to deal with the other issues.
A lot of these new filmmakers really respected the past. So, for example, Bogdanovich was friends with Wells and Hawks. Scorsese, of course, we know that he loved old cinema.
Right.
So these weren't just thoughtless young people coming along trying to smash the system.
Right.
As you say, all those old stars had gone, but a lot of these directors tried to take the best of the old system and then apply it to new types of people. Scorsese said that he wanted to take the old form, the beauty of the camera moves of old Hollywood, but simply show new types of human beings like Travis Bickle and Taxi Driver, etc. And that's exciting. You don't just throw out the baby with the bathwater. You keep the best of the old Hollywood style, but modernize it and make it serious and make it deal with the complexities of human people.
Well, let's have a look. Here we go. Here, written by, directed by, narrated by my co-host Mark Cousins, the U.S. television premiere of Chapter 9 of the story of film and Odyssey, subtitled New American Cinema.